Amid ferocious grief in Dayton and El Paso, a frosty reception for the consoler-in-chief. Will voters hold the president accountable if the mass killings continue? In the Deep South, a major immigration roundup triggers powerful optics of families torn apart. Will the public support or reject Mr. Trump's hard line? And here at home, alarming images go global as mounted cops march a black man through Galveston at the end of a rope. Was it just poor judgment or something worse? I'm Greg Rugen, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, 1/3 of the Amigos on KSEV Radio, Republican Ben Streusand. Next up, well-known Houston attorney Carmen Roe. In the 3 spot, conservative radio host Ben Ferguson. Batting cleanup, Professor Craig Jackson of TSU's Thurgood Marshall School of Law. Next up, Jacquie Baly, political science professor at the University of Houston downtown. And closing us out on the hot corner, writer, educator, and radio host Antonio Diaz. Let's begin. It's all pretty familiar. After a period of relative calm ranging from weeks to sometimes months, an American, usually a white male American, approaches a soft target with a legally obtained semi-automatic weapon and enough quickly deployed high-powered ammo to inflict mass carnage. In the aftermath, grief, outrage, blame, and calls for change, followed by the arrival of the consoler-in-chief. This week, President Donald J. Trump traveled to both communities reeling from mass murder, despite amplified requests from many in El Paso and many in Dayton that he stay away. In Ohio, the grievance was Mr. Trump's failure to advance limited gun control, which have drawn bipartisan support. In Texas, the opposition was more visceral, a distinct linkage between the president's anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican pronouncements and the manifesto posted by the white supremacist gunman. For his part, the commander-in-chief is now openly voicing support for some kind of background check expansion.
There's a great appetite, and I mean a very strong appetite, for background checks, and I think we can bring up background checks like we've never had before.
A powerful week. Ben Ferguson, what's your take on this?
Look, I think people talk about they want a solution. The reality is these shootings would not have been affected if the legislation that Democrats and some Republicans want on background checks would have been enacted. And it's basically like you have a house fire and someone comes out afterwards and says, hey, by the way, did you know you had a bad roof? It has no bearing on the house fire. This is a problem we have in politics now is people run out there and they push legislation instead of actually looking at issues that could actually affect these shooters. In fact, this legislation, background checks that Democrats have put up and Republicans are starting to support in the House and the Senate would have had no bearing on the last 11 shootings in this country. So you're basically saying I'm pandering to you. The American people, I know you're upset about this. We're going to pass a law that would have no bearing on stop none of these shootings. These people are buying these guns legally. They're not convicted felons. And I think it's really sad that we're at a point now where politicians say the American people are dumb enough that we'll offer them something we know will have no impact on any of these shootings. So what happens next when you have another shooting? What are they going to offer up next time? I think it's embarrassing.
Tony, a frosty reception for the president in El Paso. Was that justified?
Well, the President of the United States of America can fly wherever he wants. I think the El Paso people handled it with grace. El Paso strong. They made their intentions clear. And again, the President of the United States can go wherever he wants. People of the United States can voice their freedom of speech, their sentiments. They were honest about how they felt. And some of them received them, some did not. Some of the shooting victims preferred not to see the President of the United States of America. And that's the right, because really we should be catering to this community that's been wrecked by these stereotypes. Additionally, there's all this discussion about gun laws. I also want to talk about the stereotypes that are killing us. We as a community, as Mexican Americans and Latinos, need to demand that we be humanized through art, literature, and culture. We writers are doing something to heal this. Here in Houston, April 21st, Wednesday, at Talento Bilingüe de Houston, we're doing a town hall on Latino art because at the end of the day, that manifesto was simply repeating age-old stereotypes against our community. Perhaps the president is updating them. In all fairness, he's using them for his election. He didn't create them. So we need to demand art, history, and culture for Hispanic Heritage Month because our lives depend on it.
Jacquie Baly, it was a tough no-win situation almost for the president. What were you thinking as you saw this go down?
Usually when we have tragedies like this, we look to someone or something to blame. So the president has taken a lot of fallout because of that. We remember back when President Barack Obama, when he was our president and a member of Black Lives Matter, woke up and said, "I'm going to kill cops." President Barack Obama was blamed for that. He had 32 mass shootings. He was blamed for that. So it's natural for us when we're grieving to look for someone, especially the commander-in-chief. But it's very sad that we make it a politicized event. It's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as saying it's a Republican issue, it's a Democrat issue. A lot of the things that we're hearing, it is a mental illness issue. Steve Scalise will tell you, the gentleman who shot him, he's a Bernie Sanders supporter, and he woke up one day and said, "I want to kill Republicans." And this is something that we're seeing from both sides of the aisle. It doesn't matter if you're left or right, but we do want to make sure that we address key issues. And I think it's very good that our president is saying, let's come together and let's find some bipartisan support about addressing the real issues, mental illness, maybe looking at ways that we can look at improve our background check.
Okay. As Air Force One touched down in El Paso, Texas Governor Greg Abbott was on the tarmac to meet the president. Earlier in a meeting with area lawmakers, Abbott pledged swift, aggressive action to head off future massacres, measures to include immediate roundtable discussions with a host of experts. The governor's pronouncement comes roughly 63 weeks after 8 students and 2 teachers were slaughtered by a gunman in Santa Fe.
We need to also ensure that guns are not in the hands of deranged killers like the man who committed this heinous crime here in El Paso, while also at the same time ensuring that constitutional rights are not going to be violated.
Clearly, Abbott stopped short of voicing any support for so-called red flag legislation, laws that empower courts to confiscate firearms from owners considered unstable. I'm going to go to you on that, Craig Jackson. Do you think there's momentum building for red flag laws?
I think there is. I think that they're first going to try to get the background checks, and you have to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. Thanks for the data. I didn't know that 11 of the last 12,000 shootings could not have been prevented by background checks. But
well, it's more. I'm saying the 11 biggest ones were the ones that would not have. And the point is why would you pass a law on background checks that would have no bearing on stopping these shootings? I'm saying 11 in a row. The last 11 major in a row.
But the fact of the matter is, though, you can't have people who are unstable having guns. So I think it may prevent some shootings. That seems to be kind of core right there. This is a weapon that does kill people, and it's core that people who are unstable should not have guns. That's a start. Red flag, however, is I think something that has to be looked at as well. We got to talk about assault weapons. We've got to talk about assault weapons as well.
Ben, how does the governor handle this issue?
Yeah, well, he's having to handle both the grieving side and then the politics of the thing. I will say this, that I just don't feel like a lot of the solutions being offered would have any impact on any of the things that we're seeing. We all agree we don't want it to happen, and we all agree we wish we found an easy way to fix it. Now, over the weekend, I did see where the federal government was able to intervene in a couple of instances, one in Las Vegas and I think another one on the West Coast, where an individual who fit this kind of profile was making statements on Facebook and on the internet, and the federal government was able to use the laws around terrorism, accusing these individuals of making terroristic threats. I think that in order to have a material impact on the problem, you're going to have to devote more resources, more intelligence, and that means more money, more agents, and use the resources we have and go after, even if it bumps up against First and Second Amendment rights. I think you have to intervene sooner based on the laws we have.
Okay, we got to leave it right there. Coming to Carmen after the break. When we come back, as Texas families grieve, Beto and Julian Castro unload on the president. Mr. Trump responds with a major immigration raid in Mississippi. That's on our table after the break. Welcome back. This will sound harsh. Texans Beto O'Rourke and Julian Castro reignited their presidential runs this week on the potent fuel of anti-Trump outrage and the perception, justified or not, that the commander-in-chief's hard words and hard line concerning undocumented immigrants somehow contributed to the murderous onslaught in El Paso. At the same time, the coverage and, by extension, the finger-pointing regarding the Dayton shooter's clearly leftist mindset but less clearly defined motive has been, in my view, far more muted. I'm going to go to Carmen Roe. Talk about any of these issues.
Involving the El Paso issue, I think that, you know, the rhetoric that comes from the president definitely has an impact in El Paso. There's no question, and on these shootings. Now, as Jackie said, though, this is not a bipartisan issue. This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. This is a gun issue. And one of the things that I think it was important for Trump to come there and say is that him and the NRA need to get together and do something to affect change, because everybody needs to get on board about that.
Okay, Tony, Beto and Julian both pivoting on this issue. Are they justified?
Well, it seems that even the president, too, is using this issue to stoke his reelection campaign. And personally, I want to know where every single politician stands on these issues. Even if it's a nonpartisan race, supposedly, every decision people make as a leader affects my community directly, especially as these stereotypes are being whispered about or implemented. So, for example, for me, I do like that Beto and Julian Castro are directly talking about some of these stereotypes. And let me make this complicated. In my opinion, the word "the wall" too has racial implications. On top of it, let's make something clear. I believe Donald Trump is mismanaging the border in order to get people scared and in each other's throats and angry with each other, and that's helping him stoke his reelection campaign.
How is he mismanaging
Now, is any of that logical? I don't know. I think at the end of the day, though, I want to know where every politician stands. Makes sense to me, and that's just fair. That's
here's
what
the thing.
politics is
There's
about.
a difference. There's a difference between a politician knowing where he stands and having politicians that use a tragedy to push a political agenda.
Like the president.
Let me finish. Using it to push a political agenda, and knowing that you're walking out there making a speech that is not about unifying, not about coming up with solutions. What you saw from Castro and what you saw from Beto had nothing to do with solutions. It had everything to do with saying, my campaigns are failing. I need free media. I'm going to attack people so that I can get free media attention. They had no solutions in what they said, which you, I would think, in your community, you should be condemning that, saying, how dare you use these people's lives, their tragedy, for your own political, personal gain.
You're going to get a chance in just a second. Okay. Meanwhile, seemingly blind to the optics, the Trump administration green-lighted a massive ICE raid in Mississippi, rounding up more than 700 immigration suspects from 6 food processing plants. There was immediate high-profile collateral damage, as many of the children of those in custody were left unattended and terrified.
Please open the door for the parents. I'm stuck over there in jail. I don't know what I'm going to eat. And I'm so hungry right now. I need my dad for me.
The president says the Mississippi raids sent a strong message, and the arrest served as a, quote, very good deterrent. We're told roughly half of those arrested have since been released. Jump in here, Ben Streusand, on either one of these topics.
Well, just with regard to the ICE raids, you know, the people who were arrested had been in the country for over a decade in a lot of cases, and so they have roots here and ties here, but it doesn't make them legally eligible to be employed in the United States. So if ICE is going to enforce the laws, which we all have to have happen, then I think that they need to make accommodation for the children and then make sure that the children are taken care of when this happens. And this is all about, you know, starts at the border, and you may not agree with the wall, but to me, the wall is a euphemism for preventing people from coming into this country illegally. Just one additional point I want to make about the prior conversation. You know, accusing President Trump of motivating the actions of a mass murder would normally be condemned, you know, if it were any other administration. And I just have to say, I propose this test, a thought experiment. If President if President Obama had captured a third term, do you believe that the racist maniac, this mass murderer, would have not attacked a Walmart? Do you believe that if Obama were president, that he would have not gone after Hispanics in a Walmart? The only possible answer is probably not. And that's the test. So I don't think Trump in any way contributed with the actions of this killer, nor to the several hundred that were prior to him.
And I think Professor Jackson has a point to make.
We can't get into the heads and what their specific motivation was, but I sure would like to see a whole lot less fiery rhetoric from the president.
That's a different issue.
No, it's not, because we don't know.
Hold on.
It's a different issue.
Let Professor
or Beto or Castro, I agree with you.
We don't know if it's a different issue. The fact of the matter is that when a president makes a joke when someone says shoot him, as he did at the rally in Florida when he's talking about undocumented persons, it's legitimate to raise questions about what that causes. And that's unprecedented. And as far as the situation in Mississippi, the fact of the matter is that could have been timed differently. Of course, people who are here who are undocumented, there is a law that does regulate their status. That could have been handled differently. You have a community that's in trauma, and 700 people are picked up on the day of their mourning. I'm sorry, that was totally. I
want to hear from Jackie real quick.
Okay, we all know that O'Rourke and Castro are using this to rejuvenate their presidential campaigns. O'Rourke said on stage during his debate that he is a proponent of open borders, and he is definitely going to go after the president for upholding our laws and our policies. Unfortunately for the left, they have been, ever since this president has been in office, they have been claiming that he and his supporters are racist no matter what happens in our country. The New York Times just released a poll saying that the president's favorability rating has increased 10% among all registered voters because of that rhetoric. Independent voters are the ones who decided the last election. They're going to decide this election. They like the president's economy, and the less that the people on the left talk about real issues and real policies, the more they're going to pay attention to the president and his real policies that are working.
He should stop his stereotypes.
Plenty of grounds for discussion, future shows. Okay, up next, Joe, say it ain't so. Another gaffe by the former vice president lands him in hot water. That's our next topic, so stay with us. Welcome back. A bump in the road this week for Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden. The seasoned candidate, well known for uncomfortable gaffes, stumbled pretty hard in Iowa.
Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids. No, I really mean it, but think how we think about it.
The Biden campaign said he simply misspoke. Other presidential candidates on the Democratic side appear to be giving the former vice president, a pass. The president, on the other hand, says, quote, Joe Biden is not playing with a full deck. Now, Carmen Roe, you're probably the least partisan of everybody. Did that bug you, what Biden said?
Well, I mean, look, I think everybody's making a lot out of everything as we get into the heated part of this campaign. But at the end of the day, I just think it's funny for Trump to say anything about anybody playing with a full deck, because I think that's a common criticism of Trump based on a lot of his tweets. So I think it's just politics.
Okay, Jackie, you had a burning desire on this?
Yeah, so they said that they're giving him a pass. They better get ready for a lot of passes. Other things that he said just this last couple of weeks, there are 3 genders, but he can't name all 3. Vote for him in 30-30. Also, he got Theresa May and Margaret Thatcher confused. He also said that he was vice president during the Parkland shooting, and the list goes on and on and on. Insiders in D.C., Democratic insiders, are starting to question his competence. And you've noticed that his staff has not put him on a rigorous campaign trail, because they don't know if he actually can uphold the standards. And we all know that our president is a very good and serious campaigner. So we're going to see a lot more gaffes coming up the more that they put this man in the front, and it's going to be interesting to see.
Go ahead.
Just one thing about this is what racism sounds like, and how completely silent Democrats have been, who have no problem running out there literally every day, literally every hour of every day, on Twitter, on Facebook, social media, saying Donald Trump's a racist, Republicans are racist, if you support President Trump is racist. This statement was a racist statement, and they've been completely silent. If you look at what he said, just the words, How does he even survive this? How do they give him a pass is beyond me.
Got to leave it. I'll come back to Jackson in a second. Still ahead, the tentacles of Mexican drug cartels are digging deeper into the Bayou City. DEA Special Agent-In-Charge Will Glaspie is offering intel on the growing danger. He's in our hot seat when we come back. Welcome back. The most powerful, the most ruthless, and in many ways, most sophisticated criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere have set up major operations in Houston, Texas. Here to explain just how deeply Mexican drug cartels have infiltrated our community is DEA Special Agent-In-Charge Will Glaspie. Will, welcome back to the hot seat.
Thanks, Greg. Good to be with you.
Okay, Houston is both a major port and a major crossroads with a huge Hispanic population, much of it with ties to Mexico. How big is the cartel presence here?
It's huge. One of the things that Houston offers is close proximity to our southwest border, close proximity to Mexico, in the infrastructure with the highways, with the airports, with warehouses, and a large population as well. All things that the Mexican cartels are looking for to transport their drugs from Mexico into the United States and then on to distribution markets on the East Coast and the Midwest.
Okay, what are organizations like the Sinaloa cartel shipping here, and who are their local foot soldiers?
So the Mexican cartels are involved with marijuana, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, all the drugs they're cultivating or manufacturing in Mexico, with the exception of cocaine. Cocaine they're getting from South America and buying it down there and bringing it up, and they're responsible for the distribution, transportation here in the United States. One of the things that they're doing for the drugs that cross, say, in the Rio Grande Valley, come up Highway 59 into the Houston area, some of those drugs will be broken down and distributed here locally, a lot by some of the street gangs. The street gangs, while not really members per se of the Mexican drug cartels, certainly are those foot soldiers that you're talking about that are responsible for distributing some of the drugs here in Houston.
Why are drugs crossing our border from Mexico more profitable for the cartels now than ever before?
Well, one of the things that we're seeing is we're not seeing near as much marijuana as we have in the past. Historically, marijuana was a cash crop for the Mexican drug cartels, but because marijuana has been legalized in certain states here in America, there's not that big profit margin for them, and the Mexican cartels don't have to take the risk of bringing those drugs in and smuggling them into the United States. They've simply set up shop in places like Colorado, where they try to grow their marijuana and pass it off as marijuana that's been sanctioned by the state of Colorado. Because they're not involved in so much marijuana trafficking coming up from Mexico, they're much more involved in heroin now. They're getting involved in fentanyl. They're making counterfeit pills, prescription pills that you would see that your doctor would prescribe for you, that you pick up at your local pharmacy. They're manufacturing counterfeit pills now and sending those up.
You have talked in the past about the mass, I guess the right term is manufacture of methamphetamine. They're pouring that across.
They are, and in fact, if we weren't talking about the opioid epidemic that this country is going through, we'd be talking about the methamphetamine problem that we have. Here in Texas, we see much more methamphetamine. That's our biggest problem here in the Houston area, much more so than the opioids. But we're making extremely large seizures of methamphetamine, whether it's crystal form, powder form, or suspended in liquid. We're making large seizures of that every single week.
Well, we hear about cartel leaders being arrested, killed, often with the assistance and involvement of the DEA in terms of assisting Mexican police. Cartel leader El Chapo Guzman is a major example. And I guess my question is, are we gaining any ground?
We are. What you don't hear about every day is the successes that we're having on both sides of the border. Every day, whether it's in the United States or in Mexico, we're taking off large organizations. And you've got to remember that these, as you said, these are some of the most sophisticated criminal organizations, not just in the Western Hemisphere, but in the world. They're set up like Fortune 500 companies. They've got individual cells that are responsible for transportation, for smuggling, for distribution, and for the return of those proceeds, billions of dollars back into Mexico. Each of those cells operates independent of one another. So if we take one of those cells down, it makes it very hard for us to identify other cells within the organization because they don't know one another per se. But we're having great success every single week as we deal with these cartels.
Final question. You spent your life combating this plague. What will happen in the United States if the flow of Mexican-manufactured methamphetamine and fentanyl is not successfully interrupted?
Well, let's just look at fentanyl, for example. Fentanyl, 2 milligrams of fentanyl is enough to overdose and kill people. We're seizing multi-kilogram quantities of fentanyl across the country every single week. Stuff that's coming up from Mexico. And the Mexicans are beginning to manufacture it. Before they were getting the majority of it from China. Now they're getting involved in the manufacture of it. They're also turning that fentanyl into counterfeit prescription pain medicine. So again, something that looks like a pill that you got from your pharmacy, something that your doctor prescribed. In fact, it's got fentanyl in it. As little as 2 milligrams is enough to overdose on and kill somebody.
We're going to leave it right there. Agent Will Glaspie, thanks for joining us. We hope to have you back.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there's a whole lot more of What's Your Point to come. Stay with us. Welcome back. Here in the Houston area, it was one of the most talked about stories of the week, and it quickly went viral. The images, 2 mounted Galveston police officers leading an African-American trespassing suspect on a tether down the well-known boulevard known as the Strand. The protest was loud and immediate, with Houston NAACP President Dr. James Douglas saying, quote, "This is 2019, not 1819. Other advocates suggested a white suspect would never have been treated in the same manner. Galveston's police chief issued an apology to the suspect, Donald Neely, saying officers used poor judgment and should have waited for a transport vehicle. That said, both officers were correctly following established protocol for mounted arrests, rules the chief promised to change. I'm going to go to you, Carmen. You had some thoughts about this.
I think this is disgusting. And there's a couple of things that everybody needs to pay attention to in this story. A couple are that, one, mounted police officers are actually only used for crowd control. That's why it would only be under extreme circumstances that they would be needed in a situation like this. Second of all, I would love to see the proof that there were no vehicles available for a criminal trespass suspect, excuse me. And third, the family has said, and I can tell you before even going further, that this is a mental health situation. This is an individual who has mental health issues that they roll into the Galveston County Jail. They charge him with criminal trespass. They plead him guilty and they send him back out. And that's what they do with the mental health individuals in Galveston. And anybody who practices there knows it. And it's awful to see something like this occur. And then last but not least, everybody who knows anything about Galveston knows that there's no reason to go down the Strand, the main street through Galveston, when they're taking this individual under necessary circumstances for transport. There are a number of streets that parallel the Strand. There was no reason to do this except to make a spectacle of this individual and the power of the Galveston County Police Department.
Wow. Professor Jackson, your take.
I think I'm curious about the mindset that it takes to do that, to come up with that plan to walk someone down the Strand. I'm not that familiar with Galveston, but to walk someone down the Strand and with a rope on them. I mean, what kind of thinking is that? And you know, people of color have to worry about stuff like that. And I want to know where does that come from? Where does that come from?
Streusand?
Right, you just need to change the protocol so that, I mean, I don't know the mindset of the police officers. I can surmise that they felt like they were doing what they were instructed to do, and it's been verified that that is in fact correct. So change it. I mean, it's bad public policy, shouldn't happen to anybody, and it's got horrible racial overtones.
Ferguson. I don't care what the protocol was, and I'm a big advocate for law enforcement. My father's in law enforcement. This was just flat out dumb, and if this is the protocol, you as a police officer should have known that you don't do this. And this is not just terrible optics. No one should be treated this way. You should wait for a car to show up. No one should be walked down the street this way. And look, I don't care what the protocol says in the manual. It's 2019. Use your brain. Be smart about this. This is something that, and I'm glad that we have cell phones for this reason, so people could see it. they could react to it. There could be actual change in the community, and that may be the only good thing that comes out of this.
Tony, quick reaction, save some time for Jackie.
Yeah, no, very disturbing. And again, we've talked about just the optics of it. Let's just be logical. You're dragging someone with a horse in this modern age. What if the horse kicks a person? What if you knock the person off the horse? This is illogical. So even if they don't have room, they want to save face, their lawyer should say, logically, this is dumb.
We're all on the same page on this one. And unfortunately, when you have the law enforcement community that are at odds many times with the African American community, and then you see a story like this, and you see that poor gentleman that's being dragged through the street like that, and then they wonder why there's distrust or mistrust between the two communities. And it's very unfortunate because we have a lot of good law enforcement officers, but that one picture, that one optic can really send the two communities back at sparring against each other.
Okay. Just ahead, plenty of heat on Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen after more light shines on his backroom scheming against fellow Republicans. Plus, the hammer poised to fall this week on Houston ISD leadership. Will a state takeover generate better education for more than 200,000 kids? Plenty still to talk about, so stick around. Welcome back. Lots to update in the ongoing scandal involving Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen and conservative provocateur Michael Quinn Sullivan. In a secretly taped meeting between the two, Bonnen allegedly offered Sullivan House press credentials for Empower Texans riders in exchange for political attacks on 10 Republican members. This week, Bonnen issued an apology saying, quote, "I said terrible things that are embarrassing to the members and to the House and to me personally," end quote. Also this week, the Texas Democratic Party sued Sullivan seeking release of the recording while also alleging violations of the state election code during the unlawful meeting. Finally, tomorrow in Austin, the whole ugly mess will be taken up at a hearing of the House General Investigating Committee, which has subpoena power. Ben Streusand, what's your take on this?
Well, the political implications of this one are going to be far-reaching, and I don't think we're going to know until the next session of the legislature convenes whether or not Bonnen is going to survive. But I will say this, and that is that the tape will come out one way or the other. It's just a question of timing. All the information that I have is third-hand from other people who have heard the tape. And there's embarrassing comments by the speaker on the tape, allegedly. The sooner we get this past us, the better off we're going to be. And then finally, the 10 members who were targeted, there's no ideological bent behind him. It appears to be just Bonnen going after people he didn't like. And so I think that he denied that he said those things. Then he's throwing himself on the mercy of the court, which just makes that worse. And then just to top it all off, he's called the Democrats who he offended, the members of the legislature that he offended, into his office and apologized, and then told these Democrats that he was not going to support Republican challengers to these Democrats in certain districts. Now, we have swing districts, specifically John Rosenthal's district, which is HD 135, which sort of goes out 290 west of the Beltway. That's a winnable swing district, and he's making promises to John Rosenthal that he's not going to support the Republican running against him. Nothing infuriates Republican primary voters more than this kind of a stunt.
Yeah. Carmen Roe, you have seen all kind of bad human behavior. What's your take on this?
I think this is dirty politics. It's bad for the Republican Party. It's bad for everybody. I say we get rid of both of them. Because make no mistake, secretly taping other people is unethical for lawyers, and it's not okay for regular people. So to me, the fix is in. The whole thing's the setup. Both of them are wrong for their behavior, and I say we get rid of both of them if the Republican Party has any hope of saving face. I mean...
Okay.
Dirty politics.
Jackie, what are you hearing from your sources?
Okay, based on what we're hearing and seeing, the one important thing is that he has broken his own rule, which is called the Strickland rule. which is when the Republican caucus, they made a vow that you do not impose on other incumbent Republicans. And based on what we're hearing that's being slipped out, is that that is exactly what he was plotting and planning. So that's the first thing. It's going to be very difficult for his fellow Republicans to trust him once again. We had a very good legislative session. It was excellent. We had a lot of bipartisan support during this session. It's very unfortunate that he, even though he was the leader on a lot of those fronts, that this type of story would break out after that such a successful session. The Republican Party will be fine. But I do think that as far as Bonnen is concerned, his leadership role is in peril.
Ben Ferguson, what's your take on this?
One, proof idiots do get elected every day all over the country. Here's a perfect example of that. Second thing is I do kind of laugh at the fact that Bonnen goes to the Democrats and says, I won't campaign for Republicans. Do you really think any Republican now wants to be standing beside him while campaigning? I mean, that's like the most ridiculous offer that, and just shows how narcissistic and crazy it is. There's not a Republican running that would say, hey, buddy, can you come on in and campaign for me right now while this is going on? Everyone's going to say get away from. Now, the Republican Party, in my opinion, needs to do something very clearly. They need to get rid of him completely. They need to say, guess what? We're not going to come campaign for you. You just said it about us. Guess what? You're on your own. We don't want you here. We're going to find a good candidate. We're going to have someone that's going to really come after you. We're going to replace you. You're going to disappear. You're not going to be a part of the party anymore from our perspective. That's what they need to do as fast as they possibly can.
Are you excited about all this?
Hey,
a lot of Democrats?
Don't get me wrong. As a Democrat, I'm dying to hear the tape again and again and again. However, I guess my heart has to break and I have to wait because that's good too. The longer the Republicans take to release this tape, it sure looks like Bonnen was bribing someone or else released the tape. And the longer the activist holds on to it, it sure sounds like you were trying to blackmail somebody too. So hold on to these tapes because afterwards we will play it again and again and again. And I think this type of dissension breaks up what was, I give them a D- for Republicans on the legislature because they could have had an F.
Okay, we're going to switch gears real quick. This week we also learned that a state takeover of the biggest school district in Texas is now likely to happen in a matter of days. We're talking about Houston ISD, represented by a deeply divided board, mired in shameful, very public racial allegations and shady backroom deals, under scrutiny for violations of state open meetings laws and unable to meet a deadline for turnaround of chronically failing campuses. The Texas Education Agency Commissioner Mike Morath is set to dismiss the current slate of elected leaders and appoint replacements. Who wants to talk about this? Go ahead, Tony.
No, I think this is what's tragic about this. Right now, parents are getting ready to enjoy tax-free weekend because they're buying school supplies for their kids. All we should be worried about is making sure that the poor kids go to school, the rich kids go, the middle-class kids go to school, and get the most out of it right now in a few days. I don't hear that coming up. So, in my humble opinion, upheaval will not help the students progress. I think the TA needs to keep their nose out of Houston's backyard. But yes, we need community involvement to step in and make community dialogue and demands and requirements part of the next election because several school board members are up for election. Let's sit down and do that. And let's get real. We need ethnic studies in every school. Mexican-American studies already exist. We need African-American studies in every school as well. We need the best education for our students possible.
Okay, the argument's being made that by coming in and wiping out this board, that they're disenfranchising the voters for HISD. Professor Jackson, any thoughts on that?
Well, you know, the state does have regulatory authority over school districts, and if there is a sense that something's going on, the state passed laws. If it's unconstitutional, they should be challenged. But we have to wait and see. We have to wait till the report comes back and the response of the board comes in before we have any conclusions about it.
Overthrowing elected officials, I think, is always a bad idea unless there's something that directly has been done illegally. That then you have a crime that you've been charged with. We're talking about inside baseball politics here, shadiness, etc. But no one's gone to jail. Therefore, overthrowing elected officials. If I voted for them, I would not like that.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Still ahead, our panel answers the question, what did we miss? So stick around. Welcome back. Absorbing everything you need to know is a major challenge. That's why each week we carve out time to fill in some gaps by asking our team What did we miss? Tony.
After the El Paso attack, it's clear that stereotypes are killing us. We are advocating for Latino art for Hispanic Heritage Month. Join us for a Houston Latino Art Town Hall Wednesday, August 21st at Talento Building with Houston. Only art can save us.
Jacquie Baly.
I know a lot of Houstonians are tired about hearing about the mayoral race, but it's only about to start getting heated up. I am moderating at least 4 different forums with all of the major candidates. I hope you do your research and get involved.
Professor Jackson.
Despite all the criticism about his rhetoric, the president will continue to use fiery, questionable rhetoric that will inflame, and that's unfortunate.
Ben Ferguson.
Puerto Rico's had, I think, is it 3 or 4 governors in the last week there when Donald Trump said that there was mass corruption in Puerto Rico and he got criticized for that. When you have that many governors in 1 week, maybe the president was actually right and no one's talking about it.
Wow. Carmen Roe.
Jeffrey Epstein. I know everybody's got a meme and they think this is a joke, but the truth is that we have an individual who allegedly committed suicide inside a New York City jail under circumstances that are highly questionable, which for my people, I'm concerned about any death inside any jail because it's an insulated environment where we will never know exactly what occurred.
Ben Streusand.
A lot of congressional districts in Texas in play. Probably be a great topic for a show.
Okay. Hey, Marchant, starting the Texodus, there's 4 now, right?
More than that.
More than 4.
I think so, yeah.
Texas is turning blue, Greg. It's coming. It's coming.
Okay. All right. That's all the time we have. I guess I'm going to say thanks to my team. And remember, keep it right here. Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace is coming up at the top of the hour. And be sure and join us next week for the latest edition of What's Your Point. Have a great week.